Hello, welcome back. Today we will be discussing the contents of chapter 17 in the Bhagavad Gita, which is entitled Yoga of Distinction Between Three Kinds of Faith. Yoga of Distinction Between Three Kinds of Faith. For those of you who have been following this entire series, you will know that Sister Denise has joined us in the studio to share her understanding, her knowledge and insight into what is contained in the Bhagavad Gita. Sister Denise, welcome back.
Thank you.
Sister Denise, this chapter begins with Arjuna asking God the question as to what becomes of those who have faith, perform sacrifices, but cast the injunctions and ordinances aside. So it's a long question, and he asks, what is their condition? Is it sattva, rajas or tamas? And the answer is given in stanza 2. What do you make of what is contained in stanza 2, Sister Denise? What is your understanding?
To me, we're looking again at the three kinds of people. Of course, God says there are those with sattvic faith, rajasic faith, and tamasic faith. So you can see that the three gunas apply even to faith, and it really depends on what category of person one is. So once again, we're seeing that humanity is definitely hierarchical in nature, and it's not at all that everyone is equal. But the thing is, one has to try to figure out who oneself is, what category do I fall into, and how God relates to the different categories, because he will sort of apply different criteria to different categories. Somebody of a high category will have higher expectations of them, and so it's very interesting how God relates to all of this.
Sister Denise, what I find noteworthy in verse 3 are the words, faith is in accordance with the truth or nature of each Arjuna. Man is made of faith. Whatever faith he has, thus he is. So, Sister Denise, it is of interest to me that faith has such a deep impact on one's person's life and on their karma.
It has an impact, but it's also a reflection of, I think more of a reflection of what kind of a person they are, what kind of karma they do. So it's very symbiotic, you can say, that the kind of faith they have will indicate what kind of person it is, and the kind of person it is will have that kind of faith.
Sister Denise, may I ask you to explain what is meant by yakshas? The entire stanza reads as follows. Verse 4, the sattvic worship the gods, the rajasic worship the yakshas and demons, the others, the tamasic men, worship the ghosts and the hordes of nature spirits. I do not understand hordes of nature spirits either.
In the ancient religion, which you also find in the parts of the world which have not come under the influence of Islam or Christianity or the more, you could say, the more modern religions. So the sattvic will worship the gods, that is to say the most high beings who are the closest to God. They will correspond to what the sattvic people connect with. Now, the yakshas and demons refer to, spirits who are, or beings or gods who are not, those famous ones like Lakshmi and Narayan, Ram, Sita, Krishna, Radha, all of these. These would be the sattvic ones. And there are yakshas and rakshas. And so these are all kinds of worship-worthy, like wizards and these kinds of people. Now, the tamasic men would be, the thing is, sprites and elves and these sorts of dwarfs and all of that sort of thing. And there's animists, you know. So the tamasic ones refer to when you're sort of worshipping a human body, a living person who is not pure. So that would be the lowest kind. The Rajasic would be like demigods, and the Sattvic would be those who are recognized as the deities. So you can see that the kind of person, the kind of worship is all a hierarchy of that too. And in the knowledge of the Brahma Kumaris, what is said is that at the beginning of the period of worship, people worship incorporeal God. And then as time goes by, they become less able to connect with incorporeal God, so they connect with the deities. As time goes even further, they connect with the deities that are not real deities, sort of imaginary deities. And then as we go further, they connect with, they'll worship trees, spirit of the mountain, really the animistic tradition, and ghosts even. So this is the hierarchy of bhakti that is being described. And here it's describing the three kinds of people, whereas in Brahma Kumaris we look at the decline in the quality of bhakti over time. And I think probably both of these things need to be taken into consideration, because the three kinds of people will still be there even now, but there'll probably be more of the animistic type of blind faith, superstition, than there would have been in earlier times.
As Denise, I see a whole lot of personality traits are mentioned, negative personality traits, and what comes up in verses 6 and 7 is the mistreatment of the body, the torturing within the body is mentioned, and also the type of food that we eat. Okay, also of three kinds, and that has obviously impacts on one's being.
Definitely. Well, I think when it comes to the extremes of austerities, you also see that these days people doing extreme sports, putting themselves into really severe danger, and in the practices of bhakti, not just only in Hinduism but in the other religions as well, you see people doing really extreme things to themselves, and clearly God is not in favor of such things. Those are not considered spiritual, but people will go off onto those tracks and have their own ideas about what's spiritual. Then when it comes to food, it's quite common in India to evaluate people according to what kind of food they eat.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so what you have here is what's called the sattvic food. So in the practice of Rajyoga within Brahma Kumaris, we're very particular about pure food, sattvic food. It shouldn't be really harsh kind of food or extreme kind of food. And you see that as the stanzas continue, it goes into food which is really extreme chili, extreme pungent, and then you have food which is meat and insects, and the people who are eating food that you and I would say, I don't think that constitutes food, you know, but some people find this as delicacies, you see, and in God's eye this is really very tamu pradhan.
I see. Sister Denise, the next thing that comes up in the category distinction is sacrifices, and this is taken up from verse 11 onwards. The subject of food is taken up from verse 7 until 10, and from verse 11 onwards, a sacrifice which is offered, observing the scriptures, by those who do not desire the fruit, concentrating the mind only on the thought. This is to be sacrifice. That sacrifice is sattvic, and the two other type of sacrifices are also described, rajasic and tamasic. So sacrifice also has three distinctions, and their return obviously is in accordance with the nature of the sacrifice.
You can also look at the word sacrifice as offering. You know, the kind of what a person is, the kind of person they are, would be indicated by the way in which they offer to God. So you offer food to God, you offer what you do to God, you offer as a show, or you offer with the view to getting something out of it. There's different calibers of offerings, different ways in which people relate to God. So again, it's emphasizing all the different aspects of the different personality types, or the different categories of people.
So Denise, verse 14 is of interest to me, and there is something in that I'd like you to explain. Worship of the gods, the twice-born teachers. What does twice-born mean?
Well, twice-born refers to the Brahmins. And in order to be a proper Brahmin, you have to be born twice. So now normally a person gets born once per lifetime. But twice born, one of the ways to understand it, one is you're born physically, and then the other is a second, like a spiritual birth. A person who becomes a Brahmin by awakening their spirituality, by engaging in relationship with Prajapita Brahma, who starts to live a very, very pure and sattvic life. You see, this would be another birth within one same body, but another sense of identity, you can say.
The rest of that verse reads, and wise men, purity, rectitude, celibacy and non-violence, these are called austerities of the body. Would you explain that to us?
Well, here you have a stark contrast between the extreme austerities, self-flagellation, immolation, all of the severe things that people do in the name of austerities. And here, practice of purity, celibacy comes up again here as a very important vow or sacrifice. You are giving up the pleasures of the flesh, because in order to reach the level of God, you want to transcend your physical natures and become more and more refined and spiritualized. So celibacy is a very, very important component of that. And it is called an austerity because it is a renunciation, it is a spiritual practice, but you're not going to do anything which is damaging to your body by doing this. You're not going to do violence against the body, and some of the austerities are very violent against the body.
Verse 14 onwards takes up the austerities of the body. Verse 15, austerities of speech, and verse 16, austerities of the mind. Could you tell us how this impacts on one's relationship to oneself and then God?
Okay, these are called tapasya in the Sanskrit. So tapasya is a word that we use very much within Brahma Kumaris to refer to all the things that you do in order to enhance your meditation. So at the level of thought, words and actions, there has to be purity. It's very interesting that these three forms of tapasya, or niyam, you can say, the disciplines of the thought, word and action. So the words have to be sweet, beautiful, kind, beneficial, meaningful. The thoughts have to be very pure, not indulging in negative thinking and everything. And during the present days, within the practice of the Brahma Kumaris, a lot of attention is being given to thought, to have pure thought, to have powerful thought, not to have any waste thought, ordinary thought, because all of this brings you down to a lower level of person. And of course, everything you say, everything you do begins with a thought. So looking at it at the root is a very good aspect of spiritual practice, which we do at this time.
Sister Denise, I see in verse 17 this threefold austerity, as it is called, which is practice without desiring fruits in return. It's called sattvic. I need to understand this in context. One is doing all of this in order to get close to God. Okay? Say if you're sitting, you're practicing to the best of your ability what is contained in the last few stanzas as to austerity of the body and your speech and the mind. But you're sitting there with the desire of having some experience from God. You want God to respond to your meditation. Will this be desiring a fruit of your efforts? What does this mean practically? From the beginning of chapter 17, what was taken up is how one treats one's body, how one treats one's stomach, and by that I mean the foods that you take in, but it becomes more subtle as the chapter progresses. Then we're speaking about austerities of mind and what you refrain from and how you speak and how you meditate. It's becoming more subtle. Okay, so what does it mean not to desire fruits of your efforts at this level of your spiritual practice?
Normally, when people are doing spiritual practice, it is to get something, either to get a power or some magical ability or some fame or some success in something and so on. So you're bargaining with God. I'm going to do this and you give me this. The sattvic austerity is you do this because it's a good thing to do and because it brings you closer to God. And of course, desire doesn't refer at all to desiring to get close to God, desiring to feel the closeness of God to you. That would not be under the category of desire. Desire is always something that you're going to get, that you can show to the world, you know. When you go to the 18th stanza, you can see it very clearly described for the Rajasic type of austerity, which is for show, for proving that you are highly spiritual and everybody should venerate you and so on and so forth. So you're really doing it for something, not for something bad, but definitely for something, you know. Some people, they do austerities, which would be the tamopradhan austerities for magical powers, where they can, you know, do things, not necessarily good things, black magic, all this is included in that, and so that would be really negative.
I see the giving of gifts also comes up in verse 20. What strikes me as interesting about this part of the chapter is that one has to look at one's motives behind what appears to be a kindness.
Yes, one does.
Which is very interesting, because I don't think many people apply their mind to something like this. You can know whether you're an angry person or not. You can know whether you're celibate or not. But when you give something, you don't necessarily question your own motives. You may be aware of it, but you don't question it.
Well, I think this is what this chapter is telling us. Pay attention to your motives. Are you doing this because of what you want to get back? Are you doing business, you know?
Yeah.
Are you trying to profit from somebody else, take advantage of somebody else? Or are you genuinely being philanthropic, you know.
Sister Denise, I'd like to now take you to verse 23, and what I want you to explain is what the significance is of the verbal utterings contained in this verse. It reads as follows: Om Tat Sat, in inverted commas. This has been taught as a threefold designation of Brahman. By this, the Brahmins, small b, the Vedas and the sacrifices were created in ancient times. Given the fact that in previous stanzas of this scripture, it was stated that the highest is to be with God in the mind, with the mind, why is it necessary to verbalize anything, and what is to be gained from the uttering of these words?
You notice here that the Vedas are raised. Yeah. Now, it is said that God, when he gives his knowledge, gives you the essence of the Vedas. And you'll hear it in the Brahma Kumaris teachings from time to time. He'll say, I'm giving you the essence of the knowledge of the Vedas. And so the knowledge of the Vedas, depending on which Veda you're thinking about, but some of the Vedic knowledge is about the rituals. And in Hinduism, rituals play a very important part. So you have a combination. On one hand, within the Gita, you have a lot of references to these practices, which are physical practices that are described by the Vedas. And if you are following the Vedic traditions in a proper way, you will feel called upon to do this. But the way that you and I are approaching the Gita is really much more mental, and with the idea of, okay, I identify on some level with Arjuna and I want to, commune with God, in which case we would not find engaging in the rituals or the ritualistic utterances relevant. So I think that for our purposes, we would say that isn't how that isn't the angle of approach that we are doing here. The last verse reads as follows: An oblation offered or an austerity practiced without faith is called asat, Arjuna, and is nothing in the hereafter or here in the world. And this is how this verse ends, and the chapter ends. Yeah, again, I would say that these last few verses are very much connected with the Vedic practices and the utterances and mantras and all of this. And the aim behind it is Sat means true, you see, and God is qualified as Sat, he is true. The soul is Sat in the sense of it's true, it's imperishable. I think that people who are practicing the rituals and sacrifices according to the Vedic traditions want to make sure that their heart, feelings, focus of attention and everything according to these prescriptions is correct in order for their religious practice to be considered good, pure, acceptable to God, and so on. So here you have a real focus on religious practice as opposed to, perhaps you might want to say, the spiritual practice of remembrance of God, which is in the mind, that doesn't follow particular prescriptions, you see.
Sister Denise, I think that we should wrap up for today because we are almost at the end of our half-hour slot. So I just like to thank you for your insight. I think that your explanation has made a lot of things clear for a lot of people, because there has been some confusion as to how to go about including God in one's life, because there's so many options. Religion is a buffet table after all, okay, irrespective of which religion you fall into. So I think you've narrowed people's choices down, which is very special. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So there you go. Sister Denise has shared her experience. And that is the part that I'd like to emphasize. This is not conjecture, it's not theory. Sister Denise has shared from her 40 years plus of spiritual experience as to how one should go about interpreting this aspect, this chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And she also stated in earlier chapters, the question that you should be asking yourself is, what do you want? And accordingly, your life can be determined by your choices. And chapter 17 is very clear as to what is sattvic, rajasic and tamasic in terms of your food, the way you treat your body, your austerities that you practice, etc. And you can decide what type of person you would like to be, and obviously be prepared to face the consequences of your own actions. So I do wish you Godspeed in your own spiritual journey. Thank you, Sister Denise.
Thank you.
And thank you at home for lending us your ear, and we hope to see you soon. Take care and goodbye.